For as long as Hollywood has been around, filmmakers have endeavored to make dreams come to life. As far back as a century ago in film's infancy, attempts at grand spectacles were already being made, and Hollywood has never stopped trying to improve its capacity to blow our minds. But it was also discovered early on that going straight for the theater center was just as effective, and often cheaper, than giving the audience visions of the fantastic. So today, we're going over 10 early films that are every bit as unsettling today as they were decades ago, some that were even deemed too disturbing for mainstream audiences.
Freaks, 1932. Todd Browning was already a veteran film director by the time he scored an enormous success with 1931's Dracula, the Bela Lugosi starring classic that helped to define the horror genre. Due to that film's groundbreaking success, Browning was given pretty much free rein to create a unique vision for his next project. He did not fail in that respect. His 1932 film Freaks has been described as inhabiting a genre all its own, one that no other filmmaker has dared to touch. It's the story of circus sideshow performers, a trapeze artist and a strongman, who conspire to kill one of their fellow performers for his inheritance. But the cast was populated with actual freaks, circus performers recruited by the producers, including conjoined twins, a limbless man known as the human torso, and others with the types of deformations that audiences had simply never seen. Test audiences were treated to a horrifying ending, in which the scheming pair are attacked by the freaks during a rainstorm, with the strongman castrated and the trapeze artist mutilated beyond recognition. Most of this ending has been lost, as these test audiences were appalled, and one woman even threatened a lawsuit against production company MGM, claiming that the film caused her to have a miscarriage. Despite being given a new ending and undergoing other extensive cuts, the film was still considered extremely controversial upon its release. It effectively ended Todd Browning's career and was completely banned in the UK for 30 years.
The Brain That Wouldn't Die, 1959. Shot in 1959, The Brain That Wouldn't Die didn't see a theatrical release for 3 years, as distributors were leery of its content. American International Pictures, never a studio to shy away from schlock, released the film to drive-in theaters in the summer of 1962 to shock audiences who got a look at what might be considered the first gore film. A mad transplant scientist accidentally decapitates his fiancée, but manages to keep her head alive in his lab with mad transplant science. While he searches for a new body for her, she develops a telepathic connection with a hulking monster that lurks behind a locked door in the lab. The monster gets free, but the chaos that ensued was not exactly what 1960s audiences were used to seeing. Its first victim had his arm ripped right the hell off, the stump leaving a bloody smear on the wall as he collapses. The second, the mad scientist himself, has a giant chunk bitten out of his neck and spat on the floor as the lab burns down, killing everyone in it. This type of shocking violence, coming near the end of what had been a reasonably conventional sci-fi movie, disturbed audiences and contributed to the film's reputation as being ahead of its time. No pun intended.
La Barbe, 1906. Segundo Duchamp has been called the Spanish George Méliès and the most significant Spanish filmmaker of the silent era. Like Méliès, he was a pioneer in camera tricks and editing techniques, and employed both early and often to sometimes disturbing effect. In one of his most famous short films, La Barbe, also known as The Funny Shave, a man is jovially preparing to shave when he decides to take a taste of his shaving cream. This apparently leads to some odd hallucinations, as he sees a series of grotesque caricatures before him in the mirror, each one freakier than the last. While the film's subject doesn't appear to be particularly alarmed, it's safe to say that this is not anything we'd ever want to see in our bathroom mirror in the morning. It takes our hero nearly 2 full minutes to snap out of his shaving cream-induced stupor and react in the appropriate manner.
The Man Who Laughs. The 1928 film The Man Who Laughs was an American production with a German director, famous for working in that country's typical expressionist style. It's a romance and a melodrama, not at all a horror film, but its main character, Gwynplaine, Although he's supposed to be sympathetic, it's simply impossible to look out without hearing that small creaking sound in that part of your brain where nightmares come from. The character is disfigured as a child with a horrifying permanent grin, making him sympathetic in the way that the Hunchback of Notre Dame or the Phantom of the Opera is supposed to be. He works as a circus freak, of course, and pines for the love of a blind girl before receiving a big inheritance and happily sailing away to England. Really, that's it. No terrifying turns of plot, no real horror elements to the story at all, but just to look at Gawain Plain. Look at him. Obviously, it's an extremely unsettling character. It should come as no surprise that the hero of this little remembered 1920s melodrama is the obvious inspiration for one of the most towering villains in all of pop culture.
L'Inferno, 1911. The long and storied history of Italian cinema begins with the 1911 film L'Inferno, the very first Italian feature film ever made. The film raked it in at home and overseas, grossing $2 million in 1911 money in the United States alone, despite, or maybe because of, the fact that it is really frickin' disturbing. Even today, the film's old-timey qualities tend to enhance the creepy factor rather than diminishing it. It's based on Dante's Inferno, and its depictions of hell, with suicides hanging from trees and demons torturing hopeless souls, were freaky enough to be reused several times in films as late as 1954. In fact, censors required that the 33-year-old footage be removed from the 1944 film Go Down Death because, among other reasons, of a scene in which a woman's naked breast is briefly seen, which must also be a cinematic first. L'Inferno showed very early on that people would pay good money to have the shit scared out of them, and filmmakers around the world took note.
Maniac. Maniac was directed by Dwayne Esper, who was not so much a film director as he was a smart businessman who knew how to exploit the public's taste for the strange. Esper worked outside the traditional Hollywood system, taking his pictures on the road and advertising them with lurid flyers promising all manner of craziness that was forbidden by the Hays Code in Hollywood films. He bought the rights to the aforementioned freaks and was also responsible for a lot of exploitation, direct with titles like Marijuana, Weed with Roots in Hell. Produced in 1934, it tells the story of a vaudeville actor and a sex pervert who murders his doctor and assumes his identity, but the whole film plays as if it were put together by an actual lunatic. True to its subject matter, it features startling amounts of partial and actual nudity for a film its age, and features one notoriously gruesome scene where a live cat has its eyeball popped out, which is thought to either be a very good special effect or the clever use of a cat with a false eye. The film serves up plenty of psychoanalyzing and purports to be some kind of cautionary tale, as if it weren't giving its audience exactly what they came to see.
Haxon, 1922. The 1922 Danish film Haxon, subtitled Witchcraft Through the Ages, is a visual masterwork for its time. Presented as a documentary, it puts forth the idea that the Salem witches were suffering from mental illness, but this is neither here nor there. When the film segues away from its informational portions and into its vignettes, that's when the unadulterated horror takes over. Director Benjamin Christensen portrays a truly terrifying Satan who lures women from their beds in the middle of the night. There are also depictions of torture, grave robbing, and full-on nudity, though more of the artistic than gratuitous type. It was all enough to earn the film a ban in the United States, although it was highly acclaimed in Denmark and Sweden and was the most expensive Scandinavian production of that time. Some of its more disturbing footage would be recycled later for low-budget exploitation projects, such as the aforementioned Maniac.
Meshes of the Afternoon. While she is not exactly a household name, the experimental films of Maya Deren influenced a legion of Hollywood filmmakers. She boldly embraced any and all techniques that would serve her vision, and her films are notable for pioneering techniques like jump cuts, superimposition, multiple exposures, and slow motion. Perhaps her best-known short film, 1943's Meshes of the Afternoon, is a masterpiece of ominous mood and circular narrative whose influence on film in general is plain. Our heroine, Duran herself, is having a very weird day. Events seem to keep repeating themselves and things in her home keep moving around. And then there's the matter of the black-cloaked man with a mirror for a face. The short's unprecedented use of bizarre camera angles and its droning, percussive, and unnerving soundtrack add to the entire hallucinatory experience. Duran's intent was to create a visual representation of devastating psychological issues, and it's safe to say that she succeeded. While few are familiar with this piece, film scholars acknowledge its impact. The BBC cited it as the 40th greatest American film of any kind ever made.
Eyes Without a Face, 1960. Among horror fans, the 1960 French-Italian film Eyes Without a Face is legendary. Released the same year as Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Eyes Without a Face barely passed European censors due to its subject matter and received an edited release in the United States. It's the story of a mad doctor who is obsessed with finding his disfigured daughter a new face, even if the donors are less than willing. This 1960 film literally shows, with unflinching detail, the surgical removal of a young woman's face, and that's not even the creepiest part. The daughter is forced to wear a mask to hide her disfigurement, and its proto-Michael Myers blankness is absolutely transfixing, and not in a good or comfortable way. Of course, when we actually do get a look at her under the mask, it is not any better at all. Despite a lukewarm reception upon release, the film has come to be considered a masterpiece, and its influence on other filmmakers has been substantial. John Carpenter has acknowledged that Michael Myers' look was inspired by the film. John Woo largely copied the face transplant sequence for his film Face Off, and yes, Billy Idol also cited it as the inspiration for his hit song of the same name.
Un Chien Andalou, 1929. Un Chien Andalou was produced by the Spanish filmmaker Luis Buñuel and famed artist Salvador Dali. As one might expect from any work in which Dali is involved, it does not make a hell of a lot of sense. There is no actual plot. Title cards jump from 8 years later to around 3 in the morning to 16 years ago, with nothing seeming to change very much. The film is punctuated throughout with odd and disturbing imagery, such as a shot of a woman prodding at a severed hand with a cane, but it's the film's opening sequence that earns its place among the most disturbing things one could ever hope to see. A man idly fiddles with a razor, contemplating the moon. Suddenly, there's a woman sitting in a chair. She stares ahead dispassionately, not even flinching as the man slices open her eyeball, and the camera lingers as its insides spill out. There were many theories as to how this effect was achieved, but Buñuel eventually disclosed that they used a dead calf, shaving its skin down to make it appear as human as possible. Notes between the director and Dali revealed that the film contains no idea or image that might lend itself to a rational explanation of any kind, and that nothing in the film symbolizes anything.